start off the session by requesting Vivek to kind of come here and give us a perspective on what the consumer is thinking today, and then take it forward from there into various other aspects. Thank you so much. I hope you have a lovely time and we're able to have an interactive session. Thank you.
Industry, transaction interrupted is the worst nightmare coming to someone who's in the industry. And so with such a dreary topic, I must start off with some good news, right? The good news is that Indians have the best range of online payment options in the world, right? Few countries have the kind of scale of payment options and the choice of options that Indians have. Credit cards, ATM cards, debit cards, net banking, IVR payments, mobile payments, cash cards, and to top it all, cash on delivery, right? It's a blessing and it's a curse. Why is it a curse? As the industry has grown, fraud has grown, and because of that, processes have been put into place which makes it more and more difficult for the customers to do transactions online. Well, there's no customer trust, transactions die, and e-commerce fails. But then if there is no usability from the customer's perspective in terms of payments, then the customer confidence again is shaken and e-commerce dies. So can we walk that fine line between simplifying the online payment processes and preventing fraud? That's the challenge that we face today. If I were to, put a kind of a pendulum perspective, as I call it, right? If on one side you have a very simplified transaction process, and on the other side you have a fraud prevention process which has certain barriers for the customers to complete the transaction, today every instrument that you have has its own authentication method. There's a VBV for credit cards, there's an ATM pin for ATM cards, net banking has a password plus second factor authentication, IVR has an OTP, right? What is the guy supposed to remember? How much of this is the consumer supposed to remember? Today what is happening is the card companies, regulator and the banks have pushed the pendulum right to the other side in terms of fraud prevention. Usability goes out of the window. You don't believe me? Let me give you a quick example of a real life example. I'm an ICICI Bank customer and I log into the ICICI net banking account frequently from my office to check how the payments are doing, what kind of money is coming, what kind of money goes out, the routine stuff. Now one evening, Sunday evening, my daughter comes and tells me, hey, I've been looking for a book at the store all day and I can't find it. So I said, hey, let's go to Flipkart and pick up the book. So we searched the Flipkart, found the book within seconds. It cost all of 65 rupees. So I said, come on, let me go and pay for it online. So I go to the ICICI Bank account, log in. Sure enough, it says, okay, net banking username and net banking password. So I put those things in. It says, hey, wait a minute. You're coming from an IP which is not your regular IP. Sorry, additional authentication is required. So there's an OTP that is sent to my mobile phone, which has been pre-registered with the bank long time ago. So I wait for that OTP to come. Okay. When the OTP comes in, I put in the OTP number. It asks me, hey, also put in your 16-digit ATM card number and the ATM pin. Okay, let me remember. All right, let me do that. I put that thing in. Again, then there's a question. At the back of your debit card, there's this grid which has got printed numbers. Put those things in at random. I mean, what? For a 65 rupee book that I'm buying online, I have to go through all this? How many of these guys are actually going to do this? Now look at it from the other perspective. If I were to look at, making it very simple, I have an example which works beautifully. I think a lot of Apple fans are here today, shopping at the Apple store. What do? Pick up the thing that I want, click to buy. If I have not logged in already, I log in with my password, transaction is done. The credit card data is stored. Now you may argue that these are micropayments, these are all authenticated, fine. But the sheer usability of this makes it so easy for me to go and buy apps at the Apple store. So the question I am asking as a customer perspective, why can't we simplify our entire authentication processes? Alright, let's move on to another side, which is, let's say the transaction has happened. Now, because of the systems that we are working with, let's say I'll stick to, it's too vast for me to cover every area, but I'll stick to the net banking, which is one of the largest, segments of the industry today in India. Almost 60% of our transactions happen through net banking. Now, what happens when the transaction fails? My account gets debited. I have no clue what happens to that money. Okay, I have cancelled the transaction because I've changed my travel plan, so I'm waiting for a refund. I've modified a certain travel plan, and I'm waiting for a partial refund to come in. In this situation, what happens? As a service provider, we have to depend on the information that comes back from the banks. Now, unfortunately, Like the credit cards, net banking as a process through the core banking system was never meant to be used online. I think it was patchwork has been done on the core banking system to enable it to, grab the opportunity that happens in the online payments. So the back-end processes that are required to make the transaction fulfillment complete are not really in place. Now this is fine as long as the number of transactions are small and the base is very small. But what happens when the transactions really ramp up and scale up? The manual processes that are there at the bank's backend are not enough to be able to satisfy and fulfill the needs of the customers. I'll just very quickly run through some of the issues because we're short of time. But let's say it starts from as simple as, browser compatibility, at a payment level. The browser is not compatible with the payment system. Then status of the transaction, whether it has been completed, whether the account has been debited or not, the status doesn't come back till the end of the day. What happens to the customer in the meanwhile who's waiting for the information about the status of his transaction? Okay, if there's a failure of a transaction, why has it failed? Can a bank send us back a reason code for why it has failed? No. A lot of banks don't do that. If there's a single charge transaction that happens, multiple times bank account has been debited through a process. Core banking solutions for some of the banks, they don't scale up to a large number of transactions just die. Right? If there's a downtime at the bank's end, some of the banks don't come back to us saying there's a downtime, so customers can't make a transaction. There's no feedback that go back to the customers. Some of the banks have poor support in terms of, not letting us know information. I think the key is that information flow has to happen very quickly between the bank and the service provider so that it goes right back to the customer quickly and his confidence is strong. A simple thing like, a process of refund. Somebody goes on leave at the bank's end and, we say, sorry, this guy is on leave for a few days. We'll try and get the refund done today as far as possible. Here's a real example of a mail that has come into us from one of the banks. Right? So refund process is a pain. It's troublesome. It's inefficient. And that's why what tends to happen is that customer loses his confidence. I don't know when I'm going to get that money back from the bank. And it's such a pain for me to get it from it. Bank equal to merchant equal to service provider equal to the entire e-commerce industry. That's where the confidence gets shaken. Right? So we need to look at processes which at the back end which takes care of these issues. Caps on refunds. If I buy a 100 rupee product, some of the banks don't, when the refund happens, they can't figure out how much money to give back. So you can actually give back 500 rupees or 100 rupees. They don't have a process to check what comes in and what goes out. Acknowledgement reference numbers. So all I'm trying to say is the processes that need to get done, okay, at the bank's end sometimes are missing. These result in information gaps coming back down the line to the service provider, merchant, ultimately to the customer, and that shakes the confidence of the customer in the entire ecosystem. So we need to fix these. The good news is that I believe in the next 5 years, banks are going to be putting in a lot of money in terms of upgrading the systems and, moving things for the better. I think this is the time to look at the entire needs of the e-commerce customers and grab the opportunity to adapt the systems to meet the needs of the customers. So this is just a quick wish list that's there. I won't take too long. Finally, in the end, coming back to transactions interrupted, there's one question, which is there's an ATM card which is authenticated by the ATM PIN. There's a debit card by the VVV, net banking account with a password and two-factor authentication, IVRS with an OTP, now RuPay with password plus another factor. Then there's IMPS with the MMI ID and IMPS PIN. What do all these things do? All of these things touch your bank account. Right? So if you have all these instruments, why does each of these have to have their own authentication processes? Why don't we just have one single authentication process which is strong, uncrackable, which everybody gets together and works and puts into place, so that the whole process is as simple as it is on the Apple site? That's when if you fix this, then the entire issue of transaction interrupted will become transaction uninterrupted, and I think we'll have a pretty good future for us in the industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivek. Very insightful start. A perspective on global perspective here from Salil. I would request Vivek to comment on what's been spoken about pretty much from the concerns you'd raised. So did you get some answers or directions or thoughts?
Look, overall, I'd love to be in a situation where today, as a service provider to merchants and who's a bridge between customers and the banks and the creators, is that I'd love to have a system where I can build customer confidence by saying that, look, the only way we can handle cash and to break down the use of cash is to let the customer feel that, look, if I use plastic or if I use digital, I know that my money is safe, and I know that, sure, it's convenient, but I know that my money is safe, and if something goes wrong, I'm going to get it back quickly and without any hassles. I'd love to be in a position where I can guarantee to my merchants and consequently to the customers of my merchant that if there's something wrong with the transaction, within 24 hours, your money is going to be back into your account, and if it is not, then I'm going to pay you the double of what you're supposed to get, right? If a bold statement like that can be made credibly to my customers, the confidence in the system will definitely go up.
Can I just add to that? Can I just add to that?
Sure. Is there a merit and I'm throwing open to the panel, is there a merit in looking at some kind of a self-regulation or a regulatory body for merchants from where the consumer gets comfort in terms of if I don't get the product I want, so I can go to that authority or I have a recourse to the merchant through a channel which I know is neutral and objective? And any thoughts?
Trust mark equivalent
is a very interesting.
Could be something that could be created.
I'd like to add to this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at least in India, where a lot of middle people like us are involved, there's a huge amount of KYC that happens on the merchants before they're signed on. One of the biggest source of frauds is a bad merchant who harvests credit and debit card numbers on a fake website, right? So there's a very, very high degree of KYC that each of the intermediary does. Now, if collectively we can get together and form a group which actually says that this merchant has been vetted and he's been checked out, right? So it's a trust seal. I think in Singapore there's something called trust.sg which does a similar activity, right? We have a statutory body, maybe under IAMAI for all.
So the consumer, if I may interrupt, a consumer when he goes to a particular website for shopping, sees that mark and knows that this merchant is vetted as against another merchant where you don't have that site.
So you can shop with confidence on this site, right? And then the secondary part, which is post that trust mark, the second level of mediation on disputes is where this body could come in and handle.
Rajesh, your thoughts? I think I'll take 5 minutes more going around the table again and a quick 1 minute comment on one factor of wish list that you would want to see implemented which makes this industry, this payment mechanism, this online shopping experience much more better and creditable. So Salil, one thing that you look at India market and see needs to improve.
I'll say the authentication. I think looking at it today, I think it does work when you go on the computer and you're physically present. I just wonder whether it's going to be as successful when you go to some of the other channels where you don't have the luxury of pulling out your debit card, looking at the random PIN, entering 3 numbers 3 different times. I think if that can be addressed, that will go a long way.
So simplification of authentication.
Yeah.
Sandeep?
Well, if I may call ourselves a retailer, make the service cheaper.
Okay.
Make it more accessible.
Okay. Vivek?
The way I would look at it is if we can all talk together and recognize that this is a serious industry with serious potential, then all the stakeholders should need to talk together and put in processes which simplifies the entire experience and raises the confidence of the customer.
Mr. Bhatt?